On the evening of April 26, 2005, a man named John Mason called the police in Duluth, Georgia, and told them his fiancée had not come home. Her name was Jennifer Wilbanks. She was 32 years old, and she had gone out for a jog a couple of hours earlier, a route she had run dozens of times before, through the quiet streets of their suburb north of Atlanta. Her car was still in the driveway. Her phone was still in the house. John had already driven the road himself looking for her and found nothing, and he'd called around to her friends and nobody had heard from her either. And so now he was on the phone with police, his voice steady but tight, telling them his fiancée had just gone out for a run and never came back. Police initially treated it as a missing persons case and didn't seem overly alarmed. You know, people go for runs. Sometimes there's a perfectly ordinary explanation that shows up by morning. And on top of that, the wedding was 4 days away, so local officers figured this was probably just a case of premarital jitters and that Jennifer would turn up on her own pretty quickly. But she didn't turn up by morning. And when she still hadn't appeared the following day, the search started to grow. Neighbors joined it, volunteers joined it, the mayor of Duluth put city resources behind it. And then, as the hours stretched into days and Jennifer Wilbanks still hadn't been found, the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation got involved too. What had started as a local missing persons report had now become a full-scale federal investigation. And here is something investigators learned about this wedding as they began pulling at the threads of Jennifer and John's life together, because it matters to the story. This was not a small ceremony. Jennifer and John had been planning this wedding for months, and the guest list had grown to 600 people. They had booked the Atlanta Athletic Club, one of the most prestigious venues in the state, and there were 28 bridesmaids. 28. The kind of wedding, you know, that takes on a life of its own. The kind where the planning stops being about the two people getting married and becomes this enormous machine that feels almost impossible to stop once it's in motion. But investigators pushed that detail to the back of their minds for now, because what mattered was that a woman was missing, and they had no idea where she was or what had happened to her. And then the false leads started coming in. A large clump of dark brown hair was found near a retention pond, not far from Jennifer's jogging route, and officers immediately descended on the area with dogs and equipment, treating it as a potential crime scene. They also found various pieces of clothing nearby and what some witnesses were describing as possible murder weapons. The search around that pond went on for hours. Divers, ground teams, the works, and all of it led absolutely nowhere. None of it connected to Jennifer in any way. It was like someone had scattered a bunch of meaningless evidence in a field just to watch people chase it. Meanwhile, the media had arrived in a big way, and the media, as it tends to do in a story like this, had begun to build a narrative. A beautiful young woman, a wedding just days away, vanished without any trace. And the cameras pointed at the most obvious place they almost always point in cases like this. They pointed at John Mason. He was the last person to see her. He was the fiancé. The subtext of basically every news segment was the same. Where is she, and what does he know? Talking heads speculated openly. Experts were brought on to analyze his body language in interviews. And I mean, John cooperated with investigators completely. He gave interviews, he answered every question police put to him, he pleaded publicly for Jennifer to come home safe. But none of that was enough to stop the speculation, and for a few days there, John Mason was being tried in the court of public opinion for something that, as far as anyone could actually prove, there was no evidence he had done. On April 29th, 3 days after Jennifer disappeared and just 1 day before the wedding was supposed to take place, her family announced a reward of $100,000 for any information leading to her safe return. Vigils were being planned. The story had gone completely national. And then that same evening, a payphone rang at a 7-Eleven convenience store in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the person on the other end of it was Jennifer Wilbanks. She called John first. Her voice was frantic. She told him she had been kidnapped, but that her captors had just released her somewhere she didn't recognize. She was safe, but she had been through something terrible. Then she called 911 and told the operator she had been abducted by a Hispanic man and a white woman, both in their 40s, driving a blue van. They had taken her all the way across the country and then just let her go. When the operator asked if she knew which direction the van went after dropping her off, Jennifer said she had no idea. She didn't even know where she was. Local police picked her up at the 7-Eleven within the hour. Back in Georgia, Jennifer's family went public immediately, thanking the media for the coverage and crediting it with pressuring the kidnappers into releasing her. John Mason gave a tearful statement saying he was just grateful she was alive. And for about 24 hours it genuinely looked like a miracle. But the FBI had questions. And here's the thing about the FBI. They are very, very good at asking questions. Because when you actually sat down and looked at Jennifer's kidnapping story, it had some serious problems. A woman jogging in suburban Georgia gets thrown into a blue van by two total strangers, and those strangers drive her roughly 1,800 miles across the entire country to New Mexico, and then they just let her go outside a 7-Eleven with access to a working payphone. No ransom demand, no motive anyone could identify, no evidence of the van or the route or the abductors. Nothing that checked out when you went looking for it. Agents sat down with Jennifer in Albuquerque and started going through the story carefully. The timeline, what her captors looked like, what they said to her, where they stopped, how she had been held. And the story started fraying almost immediately. Details shifted, the timeline had gaps she couldn't explain. The descriptions changed. And through all of it, Jennifer kept trying to find a version of events that held together under questioning, and she just couldn't find one. Because there wasn't one. She hadn't been kidnapped. She had bought a bus ticket. Here is what actually happened. Jennifer Wilbanks had been feeling the weight of that wedding for weeks, maybe longer, in a way that had become completely overwhelming. 600 guests, 28 bridesmaids, a venue that cost more money than most people see in a year, and months of planning that had turned her upcoming marriage into something that felt less like a beginning and more like a wall she was being told to walk straight through. And at some point she had reached a place where she genuinely did not know how to stop it. There was no clean way out. There was no version of that conversation with John, with her family, with the 600 people who had already RSVP'd, that didn't end with an enormous amount of pain and embarrassment and fallout she couldn't bring herself to face. So on the evening of April 26th, she laced up her running shoes, walked out the front door like she was heading out for a normal jog, and she didn't stop. She made her way to a bus station and bought a ticket heading west, and then she got on a bus and rode it across the country, through Tennessee, through Arkansas, through Texas, and into New Mexico. Just watching the miles stack up between herself and the Atlanta Athletic Club, and the 28 bridesmaids, and everything that was waiting for her 4 days from now. When she called from that 7-Eleven in Albuquerque, she had been on the road for 3 days. She had run about as far as she could run. And when she finally picked up that phone, she couldn't think of any way to explain where she was and what she'd done that didn't require her to admit she'd done it. So she invented the kidnappers. When she admitted the truth to FBI agents, she told them she had needed time and space to escape the pressure of the wedding, and that she believed the things leading up to it had played a major role in what she did. The city of Duluth had spent somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 searching for her. The false leads around the retention pond alone had eaten up days of investigative work, search teams, divers, federal resources, all of it because Jennifer had gotten on a Greyhound bus and then panicked about having done it. She was charged with making false statements to law enforcement, a felony that carried up to 5 years in prison. On June 2, 2005, she pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 120 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $2,250 in restitution to the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department. She separately agreed to repay the city of Duluth over $13,000. Her felony record was eventually expunged after her probation ended. She sold the media rights to her story for $500,000. She and John had called off the engagement by then. John apparently used some of that money to buy a house in his own name, which Jennifer sued him over in 2006, claiming half of it was rightfully hers. John countersued, saying the whole ordeal had caused him enormous emotional distress. By December of that year, both of them had quietly dropped their suits and moved on. John Mason remarried on March 15, 2008, in a ceremony at his parents' home in Duluth, Georgia. The wedding had 12 guests. Everything you just heard is based on real events. Some details have been reconstructed for the sake of the story, but the core of it happened, including the 28 bridesmaids. Thank you for listening to the SCP Labs podcast. If you enjoyed this one, please follow and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. It genuinely helps more than you know. Until next time.